My dad used to build homes and always in the construction space. So I started early on kind of the building path and watching that journey. And it's a space that I'm super passionate about. I consider it one of the most noble professions in the world. So I think people they all want to be in a startup or something new and flashy, but the reality is people who make products that we use every day, make products that save people's lives, make products that allow us to connect and talk like we are doing right now is truly magical.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for listening. I'm your host, Kerrie Jordan. Welcome to our show where we talk with experts in manufacturing about the future of this great industry. Today, I'm speaking with Kiva Allgood, head of the Center for Advanced Manufacturing and Supply Chains and member of the Executive Committee at the World Economic Forum, which I'm sure you recognize. It's the international institution for public-private cooperation that brings together leaders from business, government, and civil society to address global challenges. It's a nonprofit, impartial, and independent organization that connects leaders across sectors in a variety of ways to foster dialogue and cooperation, to address critical issues, to help improve the state of the world, and to drive positive change across our global community. This will be a great conversation. Kiva brings such a wealth of experience and insight. She's a seasoned executive, board member, and an advocate for women in technology. She has a background in operations, strategic planning, and advanced technology. She's won many industry awards and has had leadership roles at a variety of companies, which I can't wait to ask her about. Kiva, welcome, and thank you for joining the show.
Oh, thank you, Kerrie, for the invitation and the great and warm welcome.
Absolutely. Well, it's a pleasure to meet you. Would you please share your background and your journey in manufacturing and supply chain leadership? And how has that experience influenced you in your current leadership role?
Yeah, you bet. Well, I started my career off as an IT consultant, which back in the day, meant a lot of system integration, a lot of cleanup when digital transformation wasn't really digital transformation, and really spent my career doing kind of the first of its kind, the first online banking platform, the first online order systems, all those types of things. Then I did transition into a role as a Six Sigma Master Black Belt, which is for me probably one of the most critical kind of turning points in my career. It was the first time where I was kind of in a new role that I knew nothing and I had to ask more questions and have more answers. And it taught me a lot about humility and empathy, and also around the critical nature of operations. And it lit a fire for me on how important it was to really understand how things were made. I have two boys, and that actually ended up becoming one of our favorite shows. I don't know if you remember that TV show, but people trying to disprove it, Mythbusters and how it's made, were our fun evenings at my house. But
Those are classics. Really, they're great.
They are classics. They're good. So, I think I'm also I have four brothers right in the middle. My dad used to build homes and always in the construction space. So I started early on kind of the building path and watching that journey. And it's a space that I'm super passionate about. I consider it one of the most noble professions in the world. So I think people they all want to be in a startup or something new and flashy, but the reality is people who make products that we use every day, make products that save people's lives, make products that allow us to connect and talk like we are doing right now is truly magical.
I absolutely agree. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I find that particularly interesting. I agree with, learning humility and empathy, certainly, throughout the career and as you grow and learn. And as a matter of fact, I have three brothers. So shout out to my brothers. I know they're listening, and your brothers as well.
Yeah.
So this is great. I would love to understand in your current leadership position, you have such visibility across the manufacturing and supply chain industry. What are the trends that you see happening now?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I do. I get the opportunity to sit in that beautiful intersection between public policy and impact and industry, and I think COVID was that accelerant on the fact that we have to be having these conversations at that global scale even more. In the center that I run at, we're one of 10 centers at the World Economic Forum, but our center really is, got a community of over 190 companies across every industry. So you've got pharmaceutical companies to food and beverage companies. And one of the privileges I have is getting to really facilitate dialogue around these key pain points. And one of the aha moments was when we had someone from the food and bev side, a chief operating officer from a food and beverage company, getting a best practice from someone from the pharmaceutical side of the house. And then they looked at each other like, oh my gosh, that applies to you too. And then this is how we solved that problem. And then this is how we scaled it. And that was an aha moment. And there aren't a lot of opportunities to have those non-recorded, non-public conversations. And that's the power of the forum, is that we really bring together the thought leadership. And through that, we actually just published a piece not too long ago on the global rewiring and really what does that mean for resilience and value chains. And there were 5 things that came out of that. So I'll just highlight, some of them and we can dialogue through that. But the first was really as an industry, we have transitioned from being global to being globally connected. If you rewind, prior to COVID, the majority of manufacturing happened in certain parts of the world. Now we're really starting to see that accelerate in the diversification. You see more regionalized pockets. You're starting to see clusters of manufacturing in Eastern Europe and Mexico, and then in India, especially in Southern India. And that brings all their suppliers as well. So you're starting to see actually more globally connected industries for the very first time, right? Where it all used to be kind of clustered in one part of the world. The second is that people have transitioned from doing digital to being digital. It's no longer an option. You can't say, oh, maybe I'll go get there, because the digital divide is getting wider. It's becoming a requirement, no matter what size your company is, to be digital and to think about these new tools and technologies. And then I'd say third was really around the economy of scale to economy of skills, right? The fact of going bigger, faster, cheaper isn't always the right direction. The next is around regulatory compliance. What we've seen, we run an initiative called the Global Lighthouse Network. And this is an initiative which really is, think about it as the Michelin Star Award for manufacturing. It is a peer-based award. So we have a very senior group of folks that are a part of our advisory committee. And then we have over 20, chief operating officers, chief manufacturer officers that evaluate the lighthouses, which are applications from different manufacturing facilities. And what we've learned through that, we have over 700 use cases. There's now over 153 lighthouses globally. We have sustainability lighthouses as well. And through that space, what we've really learned is that people are at the foremost of that transition, right? First and foremost, the number one indicator for the ability to scale a new technology across a factory and across factories is that you have a dedicated digital transformation leader, right? The second is that you have a unified IoT stack. But the people part is super, super important. And what we've also learned is in all those use cases, the number one driver for improvement in sustainability is going digital. And those two things go hand in hand.
That's interesting. I mean, especially since we see such growth in advanced technologies like AI, it definitely continues to come back to the importance of the team and the people and
Yep.
who you surround yourself with.
Well, and I think what we've also learned is in change management in and of itself, whether you're putting in a new technology on the floor or you're just advancing something, if you didn't bring the people and didn't ask them, will this help? Will this improve the overall operation on the floor? Then they often would sabotage it, right? Many cases and many examples of people pointing to, hey, we put all these sensors in, we spent millions of dollars on these sensors, and they just took them away, pushed them off to the side. So people have to be part of the journey. And I think we've learned that definitely through the Lighthouse Network, that scaling technology and not getting stuck in kind of pilot purgatory is 100% dependent on classical change management.
Yes. So I do want to ask you a little bit more about resilient supply chains. And that's interesting in regards to the research that you had done. Thank you for sharing those key points. I'm reminded of a story. I was speaking with a business leader. They're based internationally in Europe, and they were sharing with me a story that they were about to launch. They had been planning for many years to launch in the Americas. And it was their first product, their first shipment. They got it to the US, and their product actually crossed the Baltimore Bridge hours, like just a few hours before that, terrible collapse. And it's just, I mean, that was such a tragic event, but it also illustrates like the unthinkable can happen in your supply chain. How do you work with business leaders and through these discussions to help them to know where to start? Because it can be so hard to even know what to plan for, but that resiliency is so critical.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question because I also think that the pandemic had a big impact on how operations teams think and their response. We did recently publish a playbook, a strategy playbook, and a resilience compass that really looks at 8 different parts of what's in that mix based off of feedback from a lot of different individuals. But less than 20% of companies are really leaders in resilience. And so to be a leader, that means you actually have to transition to being predictive versus reactive. But I think even with the Suez Canal issue, we had a partner and they're like, team responded in less than 24 hours on this is what we're going to do instead. And because they had run different scenarios,
That's great.
you don't know what's going to happen. But
Mhm.
now we have the ability through some technology, like leveraging technology, being able to do that modeling, what ifs, and having that predictive capability. You can't predict everything that's going to happen, right? Never. I mean, if you try to do that, you'd have a team who was constantly always wrong. It's kind of like when you do your budget and your plan and everything.
Yes.
The one thing you know is that your forecast is probably wrong. Same thing. You can't predict everything, but you can really figure out how do you create those muscles and that muscle memory. How do I come up with a new plan? How can I do this very quickly and being able to spin on like a really spin on a dime? So there's 8 variables really that you look at. You have to look at your product design, right? Are there components or materials or suppliers that you only have one of, and diversifying the supplier base? And then also in that product design capability, right? How do you reduce that risk in the design of the product itself? I think also the financial viability and agility, that's exactly what we just talked about. Coming up with the ability to do those like reactive pieces because you've done it from a predictive capability as well. And then strategic supplier relationships and advanced planning tools. Those are all, they sound like simple things, but it's not just one Excel sheet sitting on somebody's laptop, right? It's creating that muscle memory throughout the organization to know that if this happens, how are we going to respond? Whether it's in the Suez Canal, whether it's in Baltimore, whether it's in, another part of the world, you've got that muscle memory to be able to look at all of those different dimensions. And again, I think, we've got a playbook that can help with that and a resilience compass that really outlines some of those key use cases and best practices. One of the key things that we try to do is showcase and highlight, this is how someone else has done it really well. And here's a good example, and take people on that learning journey.
We'll definitely include links to the playbook because I think that will be
Yeah.
very, very helpful. That's wonderful. And then that actually brings me to my next question. If I can ask you about the role of technology and digital transformation. On the show, we like to dig into the details around manufacturing technologies and things. So I wanted to ask you about that. What role do you see digital transformation playing in supply chain resiliency?
I think it's at the heart. Well, people are at the heart, right? To me, it's making sure that you also have people who are willing to think about doing things a little bit differently. And it's those brave ones that are looking at logistics on combined container ships and using blockchain. Then you've got, AI can also help you with your master planning. And then you've got companies like Guidewheel who are using AI in a way to understand energy consumption and usage without having to completely put in an entirely new ERP system. So across that full phase, I mean, not every company can afford a brand new something, right? They have to figure out, how do I enhance what I have today? So I think, one of the things that we often do is we have these buzzwords, right? It's the word of the year. It was IoT a long time ago, then it was blockchain, then now it's AI. And we get too focused, in my opinion, on the technology itself, right? And we have to make sure that we're really, digital transformation is all around creating an improved outcome and enhancing production, right? Or enhancing your ability to deliver to customers on time, your ability to save money, make money. Those things are grounded, right, in kind of the economics of how you run your business. Digital transformation can help you get there faster. And it's those that lean into that, right? And create a culture of innovation and adoption that, in my opinion, are able to really transform and take advantage of that. The word, though, I think scares people. They're like, well, it's transformation. So that means people are losing their jobs. Oh, it's digital. Well, I'm not digital. But I do think that over time, if people look at it as simply, we have to figure out how do we enhance the performance of our business. And here's the toolkit that I have to use. Which ones of these can I adopt faster at the lowest cost? And we simplify that too as an industry. We don't use buzzwords all the time. We kind of integrate them into what people need to hear. The faster that journey will occur.
That makes a lot of sense. It's getting the foundation right, which is your people, the culture that you build and foster,
Yep.
and leveraging technology as you said, a toolkit, an enabler to accelerate your desired business outcomes. Makes a lot of sense.
You need to be using it to solve a problem or to enhance something. I think that's the piece where sometimes people fall down. They'll be like, oh, AI is the newest thing. And the CEO comes and says, oh, go do an AI project. Okay, well, for what purpose? Like what's the problem I'm trying to solve? And being really articulate and clear about that, I think, is the most important thing. Because without it, then you will end up in pilot purgatory. You will have executed, but then no one's going to want to adopt and engage.
Actually, if I can ask you a little bit more about this, I was reading some of the papers that you had authored, and there was a recent one in regards to AI, and you differentiated between knowledge agents and automation agents. I was just curious if you wouldn't mind talking through that strategy a bit more, and maybe to help business leaders who might have been told or are thinking about pursuing AI and doing an AI project. How do you hone in on the value and the problem to solve?
Well, I think AI is like right now is just the hot word, right? And I think everyone's trying to figure out what should I do with AI. I think the reality is, especially in manufacturing operations, we have had large data sets and data models for decades, right? That's typically how you get performance enhancement. And there have been tools, whether that's a Monte Carlo way back in the day to enhancing performance measures, those have all existed. And now, and even if you think about ChatGPT, if you were creative at all 4 or 5 years ago, you could use that tool. You had to know a little bit of code and you could write some things. I would say the outcomes today are a lot better. You don't have to put in as many prompts, but it still existed. The difference is that now the ability to access that information in that tool is user friendly. It has an interface that can allow anybody just to type something in, like a search engine. That's the transformation. I think in the advanced manufacturing and automation space, and you're working with an industry that has been doing things in some cases for 1,000 years almost, right? Exactly the same way. And you're asking them to lift their head up and say, is there a better way to do this? Right. And is there a way that I could not go lean and maybe do things in a slightly different way? And if you think to the history of production systems, you had the Ford production system, which then Germany kind of took and like massaged a little bit, put a little more rigor in there. And then the next production system really was the Toyota production system. But the way we produce today is an entirely different way. We still think about lean, we still think about Six Sigma, but it can be producing something for one person, right? Not millions of units. But we haven't really changed the way we teach that, and haven't really changed the way we talk about manufacturing and the production system options. That is a space that we're diving into right now. That's a big part of the work that we're looking at. So the question around agents, agents have existed for years, right? And on a PLC system, being able to program it, you learn from a person and they put the programming in. Now you're just doing that and thinking about it and training it differently. The faster production people and the more and our ability to enhance that interface on the production floor. So the production manager can actually tap into his, 50 years of experience and speak into something or type into something. And then it actually creates an agent for him that would do exactly what he does. That's going to be the trick. We're not quite there yet, but I do think that that's the future, the manufacturing floor, where in the past you would have to test something for a certain number of hours before you would put it into production, right? And every company has a different threshold for, we're going to change this optimal system to make a Cheeto or this product, but it's got to be tested for hours and hours and hours and hours before it goes into full production. Now you don't have to do that. You can simulate a lot of those things, and you have the modeling that'll allow you to do those types of tests in a much faster way. But to me, the trick will be is when you're able to capture the workflow and the experience and create an experience agent on the floor with somebody who's been doing that job for 50 years.
Oh, that's really interesting. I love the concept of an experience agent. And yes, that makes a lot of sense. And it's exciting the way that this technology has evolved and where we're going next, which actually brings me to my next question. I wanted to ask you more about the Center for Advanced Manufacturing and Supply Chains. How do you work with the organizations? How do you help them integrate or even consider new technologies?
Well, again, I think part of our role is to be that active listener and to really understand what are those pain points that our partners are experiencing, and really figuring out policy plays a role in that sometimes too. Like how do we ensure that we're bringing in the conversation around access to talent? But for us, we within our center, we focus on 4 pillars, which is a result of that ongoing dialogue with our community. So we have 2 chairs, Kathy Wingle from J&J and Murad from Siemens, and they lead very robust, large organizations. And they lead a group and a cohort of over 70 chief operating officers. They set our agenda. They help us focus on what are those critical things that we need to be looking into. And then that sets our body of work for an ongoing basis. And then we bring in the experts. So almost every conversation we have includes that policy piece, like what's happening on the policy side. It includes academia. So who are the leading academics globally that really research and study? And then we often have industry fellows. So these are individuals that work at some of our partner companies that come in and they participate in the programming with us to help us really figure out if you go through the resilience playbook, that is completely informed by academics and policy and industry, and ensuring that we've got that balance right between those 3, because often if you're only looking out, an industry sometimes does this, if you're only looking towards the next year, right? Because you've got to make the quarter, you make very different decisions. That's one of the key things that I love about this role. For me, I was looking to really transition. I applied to go back and get my PhD. When this opportunity came up after 30 years in industry, I needed to really learn again and think about things differently. And I get that on a daily basis because the academics, they stretch you to 2040 and 2050. Like, don't think about the quarter, don't think about the year, think about the transformation that's going to happen over the next 20 years. And those are the pain points and the areas of focus that we really need to. And that's actually, I think, for our industry, the biggest challenge. How do we move faster, right? We don't move and we don't pivot as quickly, in part because of the investment in infrastructure, but we do have to get better at that, right? We've been talking about digital transformation and industry 1.0, 4.0, 5.0 for decades. We have to move and mobilize more quickly.
It sounds like you've brought together such a balance, a diversity of thought and experience. What a great way to facilitate that kind of conversation and dialogue that's going to be required to help us all move faster and to help this industry really evolve and accelerate.
It's a very collaborative community. It's honestly the first time I've been able to, really see peers and competitors coming together to try and improve the state of the world, in the sense of, if we don't come together, we're not going to be able to achieve our 2030 sustainability goals. So what can we do collectively to work? One of those pain points is simplifying reporting for small and medium-sized enterprises. If every industry partner, and this is a good example of some work that we're doing now to help small and medium-sized enterprises, but every large industrial partner has their own portal to do reporting, and every small business that's trying to support those has to hire an engineer to try and do the reporting in the way they want. That's not sustainable, right? And often some of our large partners, they'll have 10, 20,000 suppliers, and those suppliers will often have hundreds and thousands of partners that they work with, but they don't have the digital capability, nor do they have the wherewithal to be able to do that. So that's an area where we're focused on trying to bring some policy in with that thought leadership. And, to me, it's also around having that global community to connect those dots and bring the policy lens forward. And that's a critical piece to solving probably the number one pain point in the industry right now, which is attracting and retaining people, right? And policy is going to play a big role in that.
That's great. And actually, I wanted to ask you about that as well. And in regards to training and upskilling to help with that talent challenge that I know the industry is, as you said, it's the top challenge that we're all facing. But I also wanted to ask if you could touch on your work in regards to uplifting women in technology. I mentioned that as part of your introduction. I understand you've won a number of awards as well. So, just around mentoring, upskilling, I'd love to better understand your philosophy and the way that you approach that, but also the way that you maybe advise business leaders when it comes to upskilling.
Yeah, I mean, I think upskilling, reskilling, I think there's a few other words that people call it. I think it's there. In my view, I look at it in two different lenses. You've got kind of the new generation, or the next generation, right? And they're digitally native. Like, they grew up with a cell phone. Me, I grew up with a party line in a farmhouse with a rotary. And I show that to my nieces and nephews the other day, and they're like, I'm like, what do you think that is? They're like, I have no idea. How do you think you make a phone call? And so, things have changed so rapidly.
Yes.
And then there's that expectation. And it's often when folks, you walk into a manufacturing plant, they're like, oh, this is from like 1920s, because some of the equipment is older. So how do we kind of change that narrative a little bit and get younger individuals excited? So you're not reskilling there. You're igniting that you can be a certified semiconductor technician, and that's a really good career path, right? And you don't have to have a master's degree in something, or even a college degree. You can go to community college, and we need to applaud that. And there are some other markets that have done amazing work in that regard. So if you think about Tamil Nadu in India, and what they've done over the last 10 years is amazing to attract new manufacturing, but specifically on ensuring that underrepresented folks, 51% of the population, are women, right? How do you get them interested in wanting to work in a factory? They put a whole program together. They have incentives for families. They have all these different things that now has resulted in them having 46% women on the factory floor in India. And so, like, that showcases that if there's a focus on trying to achieve an outcome, you can do that. And so they've also changed the language a little bit on how they do attract women to roles. And you're starting to see that in course curriculum. I think if you really want to have an impact on sustainability, take a job in a factory, like work on sustainability in a factory. Because you'll see that the water saved, the electrical, all of these like day-to-day things, you do that, you improve the operations, you help them save and make more money too. So those things also can't be different. We really actually have to start talking about the convergence of those topics between sustainability and operational excellence. Those two things, in my opinion, are very deeply connected and should be thought about holistically. And that's a best practice we are seeing. So where companies put sustainability and transformation leaders in the facilities together and not in some corporate office, that's where you actually start to see a lot of that change. On the topic of mentoring in women, I think, for me, the most important piece there is they have to see other women who have succeeded, right? And it's really hard. And multiple times in my career, I've been the only woman for a lot for a lot of occasions, whether that's in a math class or whether that's in a boardroom. And my biggest aspiration, both my sons are engineers, but my younger son is an industrial engineer and a mechanical and industrial. And he still had a woman walk into class sophomore year, and the professor asked why she was there. Well, because she was an attractive young lady. And I'm like, well, what did you do? I'm trying to how did you stick up for her?
Also a mom, that's how I would respond to that situation.
And he was like, well, I didn't know what to say.
It's
and
hard.
I was like,
Yeah.
yeah. And, in the end, he ended up saying, well, she's like has one of the highest GPAs in our class, which was a good way to revert for her.
Yes.
But, for me, it's like, wow, how is that still happening? Like, I get that I'm in my 50s. And so, yes, that did happen in my day, but it shouldn't still be happening today. So I do think there's also industry has to put more pressure on academia to truly try to help them understand that they play a role in kind of creating that pull. And that does start with, updating in engineering. You can do use cases that are engineering and sustainability and still get the principles done, or engineering and for cause, right? And so that makes it more attractive to a larger underrepresented group of people who potentially want to have an impact job and not necessarily just an engineering job. And I think that's our role. But for me, I firmly also tried to be honest with young women on what my career path has been, and what's been awesome and what hasn't been awesome, and how you do that as a working mom and as a wife. And I also think personally, like, women are harder on ourselves, and we need to be kinder to each other and to ourselves when we can't do everything all the time, because men don't typically put that burden on themselves.
Right on. Thank you so much for sharing all that you just shared with us. And I love the way that you position it too, because I asked you about reskilling, but you positioned it as like, we need to ignite a passion. I think that is so right. And I mean, that's a great way to look at this, because when we do ignite passions and think about this as impact jobs, that is so motivating and can really be very much more inclusive.
100%. And it is what we do. Again, as I stated, I think it's a very noble profession, and often it isn't looked at such, and that's something we need to change. And that's something I aspire to, and a big part of why I'm in this role.
Yes. Well, can I ask you about advice? What advice do you give to maybe business leaders who are looking to modernize their manufacturing operation, or maybe entrepreneurs who are looking to get started? What advice do you pass on to them?
Yeah, I think the number one thing is focus on the problem. So, if you're a business leader and you look at your operations, where are you leaking money? Where can you get enhancements? And or make sure you lift your head up and look out to the innovators and the tech startups. What are they doing? And, what businesses are getting started that potentially could put you out of business, and or could help you augment and come up with a new business model. I think there's once you're kind of the incumbent, and or you're currently doing something some way, it's very hard to pivot, but pivoting is critical. So have that faith, jump in, and I think go on that journey to ensure that you can have the biggest impact.
Well, Kiva, as we get near to the end of our conversation, what haven't I asked you about that you would like to share?
You've done a nice job of kind of hitting all those. I think one question I love to answer is on the mentoring and creating the ally. What actions can male leaders take today to kind of change that landscape and be mentors and advocates for women in technology, especially? And I have a few things there that I think are super important. One is, I think it's important for everyone to recognize that whether you're male, female, black, blue, purple, you come to work every day often because you need the money to feed your family, right? And I think that's the unified motivation. But more importantly, because you want to feel as if you're contributing in something bigger, and that starts with being able to feel open and transparent and, really love what you do. And that's hard to do if you're not feeling appreciated and or if you're not feeling included. And there's a lot of biases that, are out there. So as a male, if someone says, well, she doesn't want to, and I had this in my career where we were, I was the only female in the room and we were discussing promotions and rotations. And someone's like, oh, she's about to have a baby, so she's not going to want that job. Well, you don't know that, right? You don't know her personal situation. She may not like babies. She may be doing it and then, but you shouldn't take that away from her because of that situation. And I think we always, it always often is the woman in the room that has to lean into that. It doesn't need to be. Men should have that mindset too. In those types of conversations, my advice to men all the time when they say, well, what can I do to be a better ally? It's ask the tough question. Stop the conversation when you know that someone just talked over somebody and highlight it. Be the leader in that way, or pull somebody aside and have that conversation. But the more men can be advocates in the moment and not make it the woman's responsibility, not only to be there and be the only woman and trying to live up to that level, but then also to have to defend why they're there and what they're saying. That's an unnecessary burden that they have and I have seen over time. So be that advocate, be the one to ask the tough question, be the one to say, well, no, let's give her the opportunity. And if she says she doesn't want to do it because she's about to have a baby, that's her choice. And so I think that those things are the most critical things that men need to do in order to be allies for women.
Well said. Well said. I mean, being much more conscious, being the advocate, and as you said, ask those questions and give her the chance to make that choice. I thank you so much for saying that. Well, just as we are about to wrap here, I am so thankful. This has been such a wonderful conversation. It's been such a pleasure to learn from you and your experience and your insights. As we wrap up, for anyone who wants to learn more about you or the World Economic Forum, where would you direct them to find that information?
Yeah, LinkedIn for me, again, and World Economic Forum Advanced Center for Manufacturing. Google that, and you'll land right there. Lots of really good detail, decades of good research and insights. So, and I'd say we've got one of the most unique and robust global communities out there. There aren't a lot of manufacturing. There's lots of manufacturer associations, North America, Europe, but we represent all industries globally. And we've got a lot of really good benchmarks and use cases. So highly encourage you to take a look at the World Economic Forum Advanced Center for Manufacturing.
Well, that's great. Wonderful. Kiva, thank you so much.
Thank you, Kerrie. Appreciate it. Great discussion. Thank you for your leadership.
Thank you. All right. Well, that was Kiva Allgood, head of the Center for Advanced Manufacturing and Supply Chains and member of the Executive Committee at the World Economic Forum. And to everyone listening in, thank you for being a part of the future of manufacturing.